Today in my driveway, I have 4 of the hottest new electric vehicles in America. Number 1 here is the 2022 Model S. This is the non-plaid model. You've seen a lot of these changes in the wicked fast plaid model. Now many of them rain down onto the non-plaid model. If you want to spend a little less money, but you still want to go 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, that's what the Model S is for. Over here we have the new Kia EV6. It is the sister ship to the Hyundai Ioniq 5 over there on that other side. 320 horsepower, dual motor setup, wicked fast 0 to 60 as well, but of course tamed down for the mainstream segment, 4.4 seconds in this model. It's going to cost half of what that Model S costs. Stuck right in between, we have the BMW i4. This is BMW's latest electric model. They have the new iX as well, but this is the one designed for someone that wants something a little bit sleeker and a little bit sportier. If it looks familiar, that's because the i4 is essentially the electrified version of the BMW 4 Series Grand Coupe. Itself, a coupe version of the BMW 3 Series. Then over here, we have the Hyundai Ioniq 5. This is the boxy interpretation of the EV6, or I guess the EV6 is the sleek interpretation of this Hyundai Ioniq 5. They both ride on the same electric car platform, and it supports the fastest DC fast charge times currently available in America. This will go 10% to 80% in just 18 minutes if you can find the right charger. If you're interested in the detailed review of any of these vehicles, you'll find those on the channel as well, but let's take a quick look around the Model S here. You can see that 2022 has brought the same sort of wide body changes that we first saw in the Plaid to the regular model. So this particular model wears an EPA range of 405 miles with these standard 19-inch wheels and the aero covers on. Now there have been some mid-cycle changes here because this model does not have the new Matrix LED headlights that the model will get if you were to order one today. The reason for the wide body treatment is easy to explain. It allowed for much wider tires. We have 255 tires up front, 285 with tires in the back, and these are Pirelli P0 summer tires standard on this model. As always, one of the big reasons to get the Model S is for cargo capacity. We have this Sportback design back here, but we have 28 cubic feet of cargo capacity back here. That's more than we find in the Kia, even though that has a bit more of a hatchback, and about 3 times what we find over there in that BMW i4. The Model S, of course, gives us all the usual goodies, access to the Tesla Supercharger network, lots of software updates. There actually was a software update during the day that I was filming this vehicle, and a reasonably sized front trunk that I can open via a button right over here on the remote. Now you should know that for 2022, the front trunk has shrunk. It is about 3 cubic feet, so it's about the same size as the front trunk in a Volvo XC40 if you remove the foam dividers. That's about 3 times the size of the front trunk in the EV6 or the Ioniq 5, but a bazillion times bigger than the lack of a front trunk that we find in the i4. The reason for the shrinking front trunk is because of what happens under that plastic panel. The Model S now gets a heat pump. In typical Tesla fashion, you don't need the cool car-shaped key to lock or unlock the vehicle. You can also use this really handy thin key card to open and start the vehicle, or you can use the app on your smartphone. Love it or hate it, the yoke is here, and it's here on every version of the Model S and the Model X. If you want a round steering wheel, you're either going to have to wait and hope that Tesla gives you one, or try an aftermarket kit that might be available to adapt one of the older steering columns to the new S and the new X. We have a large LCD instrument cluster over there and a different dashboard design than before, featuring lots of real wood trim. The real wood actually runs right across the dash, even behind this large touchscreen infotainment system, which has now been rotated 90 degrees, and it's a different high-resolution display. This features the latest software from Tesla. As before, there's no Android Auto, no CarPlay integration, but we do have satellite imagery on the built-in map, which will go completely full screen. And of course, we have streaming media here. We have the arcade system, so you can play games while you're charging, and then the toy box option there. Other improvements include 4 Qi wireless charging mats, 2 for the front seats, 2 for the back seats, a redesigned center console with tons of storage here. Lots of different ways you can flip and fold these areas here. There's a little storage cubby right there. You can also move that out of the way and have access to that entire bin. There's a padded center armrest that opens to reveal a decently sized storage compartment as well. The glove compartment's open via a button here in the infotainment system. We then have access to a somewhat small slot-style compartment. Moving over to the EV6, we find an aggressive and modern design language that's definitely different than the Ioniq 5. It definitely went for a more 1980s boxy with a modern vibe to it. So we have angrier headlights here, just an angrier front end in general, definitely more modern style forward wheels, and most importantly versus the Ioniq 5, you can see we get a much more aggressive hip shape there in the back, actually a little bit more similar to what we find in the Model S. And like the Model S, you can see that the greenhouse pinches in towards the rear. So rear passenger headroom, shoulder room that is going to be a bit more constricted than the related Ioniq 5, and cargo capacity is going to be a little bit lower as well because the rear cargo hatch is definitely more raked than we find in the Ioniq 5. This has the new Kia logo. Both vehicles have their charge ports right over here. There's an onboard 11 kilowatt level 2 charger, and these support fast DC fast charging. Again, you can go 10% to 80% in just 18 minutes in either the Kia or the Hyundai, assuming you have access to the right station. And of course, all the climactic conditions align because the battery will need to be in the right temperature range. We definitely have a distinctive spoiler right over here. If we hop inside, you'll notice that we have some funky door handles, just as you'd expect in a modern EV. Popping those open and getting inside, we have a very distinctive dual LCD layout. These are the same LCDs, but in a different arrangement to what we find in the Ioniq 5. We have a dual spoke steering wheel, lots of buttons and switches on the front, drive mode button there, which is a nice touch. Ambient lighting in the top end trim, and kind of a controversial feature here, we find the same button bank with a selection there for the infotainment system and the climate controls. Part of this is a touch sensitive LCD right over here on the right side, but you'll notice that the temperature control for the driver also turns into power and volume. Over here we have touch buttons for the heated ventilated seats, metal trim in this model. Standard rotary shifter here, pretty similar to what we find over in other Kia models. There's a Qi wireless charging mat, center console there with an armrest that opens to reveal a moderately sized storage compartment because there's a lot of storage going on down there between those front seats. If you're looking for a modern EV with the moonroof that opens, put the EV6 on your shopping list because this is one of the very few that has an actual opening sunroof. Now on the downside, getting that opening sunroof means that you'll lose about 2 inches of front seat headroom. Under the Kia's hood, we have a small pizza box style storage area, just about enough room to put the vehicle to load connector in here, your Tesla tap, maybe a California duster, things like that, but not as much storage room as we find in the Tesla. And that's primarily because the hood in the EV6 is much shorter. You can definitely see the long hood profile we find there in the Model S, short hood profile here, and then a long hood profile in the i4, which makes the i4's lack of front track actually a little bit more perplexing. Vehicle to load is an interesting feature. This is what the adapter for the Kia and the Hyundai looks like. You plug that end into the J1772 charge port, and then over here we have a 15 amp outlet. The vehicle's onboard inverter system will invert up to 1800 watts AC power. So this is just a simple adapter. It doesn't actually contain the inverter itself. The inverter is onboard the vehicle. It turns that into AC power you can use for powering whatever you want. Another handy feature that you don't find in every EV is a heads-up display. You'll find that in the top-end trims of the EV6 and the Ioniq 5. Let's go back here to the rear again. You can see the very distinctive tail lamp modules. Let's pop the trunk so you can see what's in there. This cargo area is a little bit smaller than the one that we find in the Model S. If we look under the load floor, there's not quite as much storage space under there as you'll find in the deep storage well in the Model S either, but this is a bit more practical than the cargo area in the Ioniq 5, which you're going to see in just a moment. Next up, we have the BMW i4. Making things a little bit confusing in BMW's i lineup is that the i3 is a dedicated electric and plug-in hybrid vehicle. This shares a great deal with the regular 4 Series Grand Coupe, and then we have the BMW iX, which is again an all-electric platform. Now, as you'd expect from something that shares a lot with the 4 Series, it looks a lot like the 4 Series on the outside, including the coupe-like profile and the frameless glass on the doors. So if I open the door here, you'll notice there's no frame around the front doors. We have the same slightly oversized sunroof that we find in the regular 4 Series. So if you want an EV with an openable sunroof, here's another good option. Charging happens behind the same door where we find the gasoline filler neck for the regular 4 Series. Level 2 charging at 11 kW, DC fast charging at 200 kW. So this is a pretty quick charger, even though it is based on a 400 volt architecture, 10% to 80% in about 30 minutes. As with the Model S, this is a liftback or a sportback, whatever you want to call it, just like the regular 4 Series. So reasonable amount of storage back here, although it is a little bit less than we find in that Model S. Like the EV6 and the Ioniq 5, we find a dual large screen setup in here and a heads-up display just above. This is now running BMW's iDrive 8 system. You can see the driver monitoring system, those infrared lights right there blinking. Those are not visible to the naked eye. This is now a bit more configurable than BMW's system has been from the past, so we have a few different layouts. If I click over here to layout, you can see that we can get more of a traditional BMW gauge layout there. There are 3 different layouts to choose from. You can also choose the kind of content that you see here in this screen. If you'd rather have more safety content or just have it blank, you can do that too. There's also turn-by-turn navigation directions and a moving map display. Over here in the center, we have new software, just as you'd expect out of a new version of iDrive. Lots of different apps basically integrated into the system. This, of course, supports Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and it supports them wirelessly. Down here we have basically the same interior that we find in the 4 Series. So 2 large air vents there, a little compartment cover for the Qi wireless charging mat, and dual cup holders, some controls for the infotainment system. No preset buttons though, which is an interesting move. Same sort of iDrive controller here that we find in other BMWs, same sort of shifter, only it's in blue, as you can see, and you can toggle it over for the B modes. That is the enhanced engine braking, so pull back for drive, pull to the left for B. You can see that B has been engaged there. It's enhanced engine braking, or I guess you'd say regen braking in this vehicle. Drive mode selectors just as you'd find in a regular BMW. Large center console over there, and basically the same steering wheel as other BMW models also. So if you like BMW's interior design and you like the way BMWs drive, the i4 is going to be an excellent EV for you. Under the load floor, there's a bit of additional storage space, but most of it is occupied by that large Harman Kardon subwoofer. Under the i4's long hood, we find not a lot other than a lot of plastic and a BMW i logo. On either side, there's a little access port for maintenance. That's for the HVAC system. And then over here on this side, we find the coolant reservoir. Now, what's odd about that is that if I lift that plastic cover off, there is a great deal of room here in this model, because this is the single motor version of the i4. And I really wish that they had given us at least a storage area in the single motor version, since there's so much room going on under that plastic cover. Really, the only thing going on in here is the air conditioning compressor for the electric air conditioning system. And of course, sort of a snake's den worth of associated plumbing for the heating, cooling, and battery conditioning systems. Due to the short hood profile in the Ioniq 5 and the EV6, I'm not disappointed by the lack of front trunk, but I have to say, in the i4, it's the opposite case. I am a little bit disappointed. To me, the EV6 looks like what Volkswagen would have imagined a Golf to look like in the 21st century if they were doing that imagining in 1980. It definitely has a very Tron look to it. We have basically the same sort of door handles. Those are definitely common elements between the two vehicles. Very similar side view mirrors, very different wheels, and interestingly, a very different wheelbase as well. Although the battery pack is basically the same size in terms of capacity between the Ioniq 5 and the EV6. There are 3 different battery packs around the world and 3 different power outputs at the moment. The actual cells may or may not be shared. Hyundai won't tell us. This supports the same fast charge rate that we find in the EV6. 18-minute DC fast charge if you find the right station. We have a really attractive multi-module gauge there to tell you how much battery power is left. The rear end is definitely very boxy as well, and we have this really interesting multi-module lamp that goes all the way from one side to the other. If I open up the cargo area, we find more cargo space and a boxier cargo area than we find in the EV6, but for some reason the subwoofer for this Bose audio system is right here in the middle of the cargo area. I think that's a pity. They could have put it off to one side or put it at the front. It would have taken up less space. When you hop inside, it's obvious that space is what the EV6 is all about. We don't have an opening moonroof. Instead, we get a fixed sheet of glass with the roller shade that is powered and completely blocks off the lights. If you like that particular look, here's a good option for you. Lots of rear seat headroom thanks to the boxy design, lots of rear seat legroom as well. Sunshades integrated into those side doors there as well. Very different seat shape to what we found in the EV6. Reasonable amount of bolstering. This has a very linear theme on the outside and on the inside. That's really obvious when you look at the dashboard and you see the stripes running across the dash. 2 large LCD screens, again, the same LCDs and same basic software to what we find in the Kia, only this has a bit of a Hyundai touch to it. So you can see that the actual icons are just a little bit different in here, but the theme is very, very similar. Now, this does have separate physical buttons for the climate control and the infotainment system, but kind of an odd twist. If you want to control the seat heating and ventilation, we have to hit this climate button. Then we go up here into the infotainment system, choose the front warmer or ventilation option. Then we can adjust the driver or passenger seat heating or ventilation. So I think both of these vehicles took button minimalization just a tiny bit too far. We have a very similar kind of floating center console, I suppose you could say here, but we have that storage bin up front, a sliding section right here that slides forward and backward in that manner. Then there is a floating armrest and a large mid-storage area. So if this is all the way back in place, this definitely has a much airier vibe to it than the EV6 with that more traditional console feel. Because Ioniq is sort of a sub-brand for Hyundai, one interesting twist is there's no Hyundai logo on the steering wheel. Obviously, the Model S is going to be the fastest of the bunch, but the rest of the performance numbers might surprise you a little bit. This i4 goes 0 to 60 in 5.5 seconds. If you choose the all-wheel drive version, that drops down to 3.7 seconds. This Ioniq 5 and this EV6 managed to tie at 4.4 seconds 0 to 60. So even though these have dual motors and range figures that are not far off of this rear-wheel drive BMW i4, they get all-wheel drive and faster 0 to 60 times. And if you want to go even faster in your Kia for probably less money still than this i4, there's going to be an EV6 GT that's going to give you nearly 600 horsepower and a promised 0 to 60 time of under 3.5 seconds. Of course, if you want to go even faster, you could engage the launch control mode on this Model S and go 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, or you could upgrade to the Plaid, which is going to be about 20% more expensive, and that will get you 0 to 60 under 2 seconds. With the biggest battery of the bunch, the Model S will go the furthest on a charge, 405 miles of range in this version. If you choose the S with the Plaid drivetrain, then that will drop down to 348 miles of range, and the other versions slot somewhere in between. The EV6 will range from 310 miles down to 232 miles if you choose the rear-wheel drive standard range version. This dual motor version with the big battery comes in at 274 miles, which is pretty similar to this BMW i4 at 282 miles. This one has the only battery pack available in the United States and the single motor setup. Theoretically, that could get you up to 301 miles of range, but this has an upgraded wheel and tire package, and that drops things down to 282. Now, if you get the dual motor version of the i4, then things drop considerably down to 227 miles of range. The Ioniq 5, thanks to its boxier shape and its slightly different dimensions versus the EV6, gets a little bit less range. You'll get a little over 300 miles of range on a full charge if you choose the single motor rear-wheel drive one and the big battery pack. This particular model comes in at 256 miles of range, and if you choose the smallest battery pack available, it's going to get a little bit less range than the EV6. As you'd expect, the Model S is the most expensive of this bunch, starting just under $100,000. Now, it is worth noting there's no dealer markup on a Model S because there's no dealer, and that is one of the big benefits to buying a Tesla, to be perfectly frank, is that you don't have to deal with the dealer. I did buy a Model 3 once upon a time, and the process was the best car buying process I have ever experienced. You do it all online, you scan your documents, someone drops off a car to wherever you want them to drop it off. It was super duper simple. The paperwork was even somehow shorter than a regular car purchase. I have no idea why car buying for any of these other options takes so much time, and there's so much paperwork, so many signatures, such long forms, when it can be so easy, and Tesla has really showed the way there. Over here on the Kia, this is going to start at just under $41,000, so a little bit less than this BMW i4. This starts at $55,400, as tested is $68,900. Now, you should keep in mind that the BMW, the Hyundai, and the Kia, they all have the $7,500 tax credit on them, and of course the Tesla Model S does not. Now, logically, the Model S is the odd one in this bunch. I did not have access to a Model 3 or a Model Y, which would have been a more appropriate comparison here, but we'll just go with what we've got here. Now, the EV6 as tested here, it's nearly at the base price of this, or actually a little bit over, depending on the options that you get. That model came in at around $58,000 all in. The Ioniq 5 sort of splits the difference a bit here. It's a little bit less expensive or a little bit more expensive depending on the options that you're looking at, but generally speaking, less than the EV6. $56,000 tops for this model, $39,950 for the base model. But it's important to keep in mind the base version of the Ioniq 5 and the EV6 is going to be quite slow compared to this BMW. I have to admit that driving these vehicles for a week, the comparison between the EV6 and the BMW was the one that intrigued me the most, not just because they're blue, but because of how close the price tags on these vehicles can be. There is significant overlap, and really because of how much electrification can be a great leveler in the car industry, because Kia has a 320 horsepower all-wheel drive dual motor vehicle with a strong rear power bias and decent range, and you can have it for about the same price as this rear-wheel drive BMW i4. And in terms of driving dynamics, there is simply not that much daylight between these two options. Yes, they do drive differently, they handle differently, but not as differently as a Kia Forte versus a BMW 4 Series. They are an awful lot closer. And of course, you get faster charging over there on the Kia. Now, the best sedan here, of course, the best electric vehicle here, of course, has to be the Tesla Model S. It is the ultimate for everything, but it is going to cost you. The rest of these three, they operate in the tougher world of value proposition. So What do you get for what you pay? And I have to admit that if that is your consideration for buying a new electric vehicle, the Ioniq 5 wins by a slight hair, but the EV6 is a solid runner-up. I have to admit being very torn. We bought our long-term EV6. We're going to keep it for about 6 to 9 months here at Allison Autos, primarily because I could not get my hands on an Ioniq 5. The EV6 was actually a little bit easier to find for me, but I was honestly very torn between the two. This is a little bit more pragmatic. It has that bigger cargo area in the back. It has a bigger back seat as well. Under the hood, we find the same kind of storage area, and I like the look of both of them in completely different ways. This is definitely very, very retro, modern retro, which I really honestly love. And I love the fact that this definitely looks like a Volkswagen to me. And the EV6 is thoroughly modern in an entirely different way. It actually reminds me perhaps a little bit of some of the concepts we've seen for electrified Jaguars in the future. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that in the comment section, and what would you pick if you were shopping for a new EV in America? Would you get the Hyundai? Would you get the BMW? Would you be willing to spend about 20% more for that BMW? Would you get the Kia? Or would you spend another $50,000 and get the king of them all, that Model S over there? Let me know down there. Be sure and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. And of course, stay tuned because there will be separate videos on all of these and some appropriate comparison videos coming up just as soon as possible. I'll see all of you later.